Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Biggening Corporation, our Business Central Development live stream. Today, we're going to have an odd little Friday afternoon to do. Just to recap for anyone joining new, once again, you might want to go back to episode 1, but in short, we are making an incremental game using Business Central as the game engine, where players use bots to do transactions to compete to generate wealth. Today's goal is an odd one. We are coming up on being able to finally have our bots doing some of the business transactions that players are going to need the bots to do, such as working with items. They're going to need to create sales orders and purchase orders and inventory transactions and all that sort of thing. But the bots are going to need to do that, quote unquote, automatically. If you've been in the industry for a long time, this word should terrify you. Anytime someone uses the word automatic or any combination thereof, automatically, whatever have you, they are basically baking into the spec a whole host of assumptions that they typically have not communicated to you in any sort of way. I generally yell at people politely and say what you're looking for is Automagic, and I don't code magic. This is unfortunately not the world we live in. I would love to code magic. We're not there. Anytime someone wants something automatically to happen, they're looking for the system to act in a way that they're expecting without them telling the system what to do. But that means that we need some means by which to tell the system what those expectations are. So that gets us into a really sticky place really quickly. And in our scenario here, we're not dealing with too scary of an quote-unquote automatic just yet. We are going to aim low. We are going to want to have a single customer, a single item, a single vendor, and we are going to create a sales order, receive it, purchase order, receive that, and then a sales order and ship that, and see what information we are missing in the flow of things. And whenever we're creating core transaction functionality using any sort of code-based system, the smartest thing you can do is analyze what would happen if you were the automatic system. So that means, for example, we are going to create the item, we are going to create the customer, we are going to create the vendor, we're going to create the transactions, and it's in our benefit to see what information is being handled, what pop-ups come up along the way, if there are any settings that we are missing. So we're going to need to keep a little bit of a checklist as we flow through the system to see what parts of information either in setup that we don't have, what assumptions are in this workflow that we haven't addressed, all that sort of stuff. So the smartest thing for us to do is we'll whiteboard this in a Word doc real quick. And since this is going to be just our digital white space, we don't care about margins, we are going to whiteboard out what is actually required for each of the different situations that we're going to be working with. So in our case, we know that we are going to create an item, and then we are going to create a customer, we're going to create a vendor, we have vendor, and then finally with those in place, that's when we will create a purchase order and purchase order line, and then we will try to post, and in our case we're going to go with the handling of the simple logistics, which is that the bots will treat this as a basic inventory scenario and that it's the same as a post and receive operation. And then we will create a sales order and sales order line. I'm breaking these two out into separate steps because I assume we're going to want separate notes about those different steps. So some things that I know are going to come up along the way. For example, right now, we've got some of the posting groups and category codes and product posting groups all set up for items. We've got some of the posting groups set up for customers and vendors. That, after all, is our role center at the moment here, is those things are here. We will use Test Player 5's company to test things out, but there are some things that I know will need to be added to any code that is going to do each of these steps, which these are probably going to map nicely to individual functions to generate item, generate customer, etc. So I might even say let's break these line-based ones out so that way we can have separate thought about those. For example, one of the things I know is going to come up for item is the unit of measure table. Every item has a base unit of measure, and that is coming from a subsidiary table of the item unit of measure. So we know that that's going to be a thing. So our job is to go through each of these process and note down what do we miss, what are we going to need to handle, and this will give us the skeleton of the different functions we're going to need in the different code units. So for some of you, this might be really redundant stuff. You do this sort of thing all the time. I don't know, but we need to know, and we need to know the data. Now, the nice thing about Business Central is that when we punch something into a field on a page, generally speaking, the validation logic is almost always at the table. So if we validate a field in our code units, for example, then we, go figure, get all that wonderful validation logic working for our code as well. There are a couple places where I know that's not going to come up. For example, we know that on the purchase order line, there's a line number that is auto split key. So we're going to have to handle our own logic for auto split key on these lines. We know that's a thing. That is definitely a page level thing. So, and yeah, so let's go ahead and in our Test Player 5 company, we have no items, because we haven't created any logic to copy the master items. This is our process of getting the notes for that. So we know that in our master items, we have part 1000, and that is going to come in as fabric parts. And we can see right away that it's going to ask for a base unit measure, and we don't even have units measure. So there already is something we know that the item unit of measure needs to exist, but we can also create a little section, I think at the top here, general company setup. We don't have general units of measure. So we know that we're going to need, we're going to work with eaches, and we'll do that in English, so EA will be just fine. So we're going to create a new unit of measure, each. I don't happen to know all the codes off my head, so I'm not going to do that. Okay. Okay, so now we know that's all set. And we also know that we have the item category codes, which we don't, I think, have copying those over just yet. So we're going to skip that for now. It's not posted information that will drive anything, so we're okay there. But eventually that will be something. I think it was like raw parts or something. But now we get down into the costs and posting. And here we know that this is general product posting group and that exists. That's cool. It's telling us that the VAT product posting group is required. We'll see if that actually is. Because I'm going to probably have most companies not doing anything with the VAT transactions in this for the moment. We'll see if it blows up by leaving that empty. And then inventory posting group, we've got that set. In theory, but for that VAT posting group, we theoretically have everything we need. And I'll leave the costing method FIFO for now. I don't know that we'll fuddle around with costing too terribly much in the series. That gets real complicated real quick. So theoretically, we know that that's there. So our items unit measure. Okay, and then we have the question mark, because we'll put it here, VAT product posting group. Okay, so we've identified that theoretically. Now we're going to do a little other setup work. We'll go create our first customer here, and we're just going to create this one as test 1 because it does not matter for our purposes. Test 1, sure. So on the customer, we've got the number and description, which we always know to generate anyways, and we've got some product posting groups. This will be a tier 1 customer. And I'm hopeful that by not having our customers and vendors flagged as tax liable, that maybe we won't need to fill in the VAT and tax fields. Let's find out. We know that we need some payment terms. I set up a few example ones. We'll try out some of these, like 4 days. Sounds good. So those we know are already all set. So let's see what we need on the vendor, and then we'll try creating some test transactions. Great. Okay, so we will do v test 1 just because I want to differentiate a little more clearly that this is the test 1 vendor. It should be fine. But same story here. We know we've got posting groups and posting groups. Those are already known and planned for. Great. Let's find out what happens. So, as I said, when we get into Automagic as a descriptor, there is always a lot of assumptions. So I thankfully know pretty well that for all of these different types, we know that we need number, we need name, we need the posting groups, and that sort of thing. Those we've already handled and accounted for, but it's when we get into the documents that it will really test our validation. For example, do I have everything set up that we need on those posting groups? So we may come back here and add some more to our general setup of what else is missing. Without this map, we could get lost in the weeds pretty quick on the code. So it's always a good idea to set up a copy of whatever company you're working with and just test the transactions yourself. So let's go ahead and create a purchase order. Now, at this stage, we don't have numbering. And it's going to complain we don't have numbering series set up. And I believe I have not even made, yeah, this is just a default one. So I haven't even made document numbers. So either our bots are going to have to handle that explicitly, or we're going to need number series lines. My inclination is we should zoom back out a little bit here, and we should have number series. And then that not only do we need the number series set up, but that means that we need sales and receivables set up and purchases and payables set up. Both will need to have some information about that. So let's cancel out of this here. Close. It's nice of that to offer. I think that's a really good guided setup workflow that if someone is not knowing what they're doing about setting up BC, like someone who just signs up for a demo or whatever have you, that would probably be useful. One of the things I think probably would also be great is if there was a little more guided explanation on this. Maybe the assisted setup does something for that. Not sure. Apologies. All right, so let's create some series here for sales orders, and we'll create posted sales invoices, and then purchase orders. And I'm inclined to say that we'll probably go ahead and also create customer and vendor ones as well. I suspect I need to have some posted sales shipments and posted purchase receipt number series. We'll test that out. I like to see, frankly, what sort of error message it's going to throw at me. I am doing all this setup in test player 5, so I'm going to have to reproduce anything I create here in the master company. And as part of our checklisting in the general company setup, we will need to add some number series logic. Now, you'll note I am just creating the code and the description. I haven't actually created the number series here, and we're going to go into that in just a second. Let's see, so sales. I know I need at least posted sales shipment. I don't know if I need the interim sales invoice number, posted sales invoice, posted sales shipment. Yeah, whatever. I think I can go ahead and use the same number series for both, and it'll just, if for some reason someone deletes a sales invoice or sales shipment, which players won't be able to do, it would leave a gap in the number series. That's fine. And we'll get into what I mean by that in a second if you don't know. So let's see, posted sales shipment, purchase. This is obviously posted purchase receipts. We're going to need a lot more of these when we start doing things like assemblies and warehousing. So eventually we'll need a nice test player company where we can do a lot of these configurations and test transactions. So we'll probably create a test company at somewhere along the way, and then we can easily use that test company to do some of the transactions. So I'm going to create number series for customers and vendors while I'm in here. So if you haven't worked with number series before, and this is new to you, for a given number series, you can specify lines on the number series and have them increment, and you can also change number series at points in time. Some companies really like to embed information into their document series, so that way as soon as you see the document number, you have an idea already of what's involved. For example, some companies might like to say that a sales order should always start with SO dash. Well, okay, yeah. I mean, there is utility to anytime you're looking at a document and it has SO dash, you know what document type that is. There is utility to that. I have even seen companies do things like put the year into the document, so an SO20, and then they can just update as part of their end year process that on the first 01/01/20, that goes into effect, and on the first in 2021, then SO21 goes into effect. So I've seen a few different things. It is also equally common that companies might just say, all of our documents start at 100,000. Across the board, everywhere you see a document number, you also see a document type. So we could have a sales order 100,000 for, as well as posted invoice 100,000 for. Okay, all right. So there are a variety of techniques on this. If you're setting this up for a company, I would encourage them to have a chat with their auditors and accountants with that one. That's a business decision and probably not left to a developer, but it's good to know it's possible. Okay, so in my case, for sales orders, I am going to go with the SO dash style, and I'm going to start us at 10,000, because why not? The formatting to this is that you specify the begin-end range, and it wants them to match. I think you can do... Yeah, so you'll notice that as soon as I put in the 6-digit number here, 9999, and tabbed off, it auto-bumped this up to also be a 6-digit number. It wants you to have your code type values, which these are. They're actually code 20 values. It wants them to be the same numerical length to prevent sorting weirdness when you sort things, because these are treated as alphanumeric for sorting, not numeric. So 10,000 would come at the top, but if we had then later on somehow someone in their brilliant mind decides we're going to do 100,000 or whatever have you, if this up here was like that, well, 100,000 is going to come awfully close to 10,000 in the sorting because it is alpha sorting. So leave a lot of room wherever you can. It's better to start with typing a 5-digit number and then go, well, we have numbers for now until forever, than it is to end up having a situation like this where you go, oh, geez, now we need to bump it up to 6-digit numbers because these are going to sort really weird. So, yeah, just random advice of setting up of things. Last date use and last number use will automatically get filled in by the system. We are definitely going to use large document numbers because these bots are potentially going to be in the hundreds per company. And if we're doing business day every 15 minutes, we are going to run out of numbers very, very quickly. I think, 15 minutes times 24 hours in a day. So yeah, there's a lot of days per real world day. We'd run out of numbers pretty quick. So it's a good idea for us, since no one's going to be keying in the individual document numbers, to go kind of crazy, make these jumbo numbers. Sounds fine to me. It'll be interesting to see if we ever do have a number this big. I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm estimating growth curves correctly, but I guess we'll find out in season 1, won't we? It may behoove us, and I'm going to create a note here in our notes, our little whiteboard for the day. When we set up permissions, because we're also going to use this document as a guide to what are we needing to test for permissions, we may want to give players the ability to update number series tables. So that if something does go wrong in their world and a sales order number series does get consumed and they've managed to create the 100 million transactions that we're allocating for the number, I mean, for one, my database is going to cry. But for two, if we allow them permission to come in here, they can update with a new number series and kick that on without a system administrator assisting. So that's always good. If a user is entering things, you can have a warning number. So that way, hey, you're running out of numbers. I think I still put in too many digits on that. I do like that these days it just auto updates across the columns, but it does lend itself to accidental abuse. You can choose how it increments for if you want sales orders to go up by something other than just one. You might want that, for example, maybe in customers. You want them to bump up by 10 for some reason. You can do that. That's fine. You can choose if you allow gaps in that or not. Interesting. Okay, so there's some tax-related setup in there that we're not going to muck with. But you can see now here back on our number series table, we have a flow field to tell us what the current one would be. We do also need to set default numbers. Yay. And if it mattered for us, we might need to turn on date order. We don't in this case. That's fine. So, alrighty. Let's see. I'm going to pause my chitter chatter for a couple minutes just so that way I can real quick copy this sort of logic flow down into all of these other document types. Hooray. Let's pin that open. Okay, this is posted sales invoice, so PSI dash. Sounds good. How many zeros did it end up giving me? I like that we can resize columns now. Did not have that ability pre-16. Okay, so I went with 9 due to my typo there, but that's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sounds good. And PSI dash. Now, if you try to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0, 0, 0, it will complain, I think. It used to validate to make sure your warning number actually made sense in context of the rest of your number series. I guess it doesn't complain about that anymore. Interesting. It should, actually. It would not have been possible to reach the warning number I entered. Okay, and then we'll do... yeah, and it will complain you need to have a number in there, which I just meant to hit paste. Did not do the right number of digits in there. Well, that's an interesting question. If I do ship-9, hey, that's kind of neat. It auto-padded it. Yeah. Okay. What happens if I paste my big number in here with ship-? That's nice. Alright. Interesting. Alright. In some ways, I miss having it just give you the error message, because if we just key it in wrong, it would have just errored at me that that series didn't line up. Now it's bumping over. I don't think I like that, because you're not 100% sure if it took your correctly typed version versus your typoed version. Alrighty. Oh, almost done. Post-purchase invoice. Okay, and this is a fine example of I look forward to having this set up in my master company and not do this. Let's do receipt. Occasionally through my headphones I hear children playing outside, and I honestly have not gone back to check in my recording if those sounds are picked up by my microphone. It's an interesting question. Okay, so for customers, I don't have a particular numbering strategy in mind. We could, end up with eventually a significant number of customers. I'm not going to cap it by any stretch. But for customers and vendors, I think we can go with a much more straightforward, just, let's go with a 6-digit number for giggles on that. I don't know what to expect on how it will work for players playing this game. What will make sense? Do they harvest good, strong vendors and customers and focus on those? Do they do broad support? I don't know. And I do know that I haven't turned on the default checkbox up at the next level here. Okay, great. So those are all on. And in a normal company, I could see there being value, for example, to potentially doing manual numbers for some customers and vendors. Don't have to, but in our case, the default numbers is fine. So now, with all that stuff set up, let's go to sales and receivables setup here. Great. And now a quick little run through on the number series. This will be a short list. I may just copy Kronos over to the master company and use theirs, because I'm kind of feeling lazy and don't want to set all this up again. But I may pad their numbers to match these. And I, in my talking, am starting to assign purchase number series to the sales table. So that's the danger of chattering along. So some companies do this. It's up to you. It's up to your business advisors and decisions, whatnot. You can have your invoice numbers and posted invoice numbers be the same number series. It means that when you create, say, invoice 3, for example, if you're on that invoice and you have these configured in this way, when you delete invoice 3, it will tell you that because you're using the same number series for the posted invoices, there will be a gap in the series and that it will post an empty one just to indicate that that number has been consumed for accounting clarity, which I think is reasonable. In a normal company, we would absolutely need credit memos. We're not going to worry about that. Same for return receipts, return orders. And I am not adding to the metagame of this, fighting with reminders and charges and overfees and everything like that. That would make for much more realistic test data, so we may do that later. But for wave 1, it's... having your bots manage debt collection does not sound like fun. It sounds realistic, but it doesn't sound like fun. I think there might be some value to that later. Wait, for real? Vendor and invoice is promoted, but purchase orders is hiding behind the additional. Okay, that's same for receipts. What a bizarre choice. Okay. Sure. Okay. Alright, so now we know that we had to do the number series setup. We had to do number series lines for those. We needed sales and receivable and purchase and payable setup. So now if we try to create a purchase order, it should not complain that we are missing purchase order number series anymore. I find it really interesting and strange that the default UI, when you first hit that create a new one, we don't have any idea that a purchase order number is coming. I think that's a little awkward for users. So now we'll pick which vendor. And it's not until we tab off that we finally get our purchase invoice. I've seen some new users get confused by that, so it's something to think about, that will confuse people. I do appreciate that now there's the nice ability to copy this filing. I remember some early versions, for whatever reason, couldn't. It would click and do weird things. All right, so by validating the vendor name from the drill down, because that's what we did. We did the drill down on that. Then it created a whole bunch of stuff for us, and it did an insert. So now if we look, if you didn't know, up here under the help and support, way down at the bottom, troubleshooting, inspect pages and data. This will let you look at the table data for whatever you're looking at. Now, obviously, on my resolution, this scrunches it up tiny, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that fact box, and maybe it'll be a little more usable. But we can see now which page we're looking at. It is a document type page, page 50, purchase order. It is reading from table 38, purchase header. It also tells us what extensions are involved in showing this table. So, for example, since I used Acronis North America to generate this database, I have some localization for Mexico, and I have the built-in sales and inventory forecast extension, as well as base, of course. So nice and easy. It shows us all of the fields from top to bottom. So here's the thing. When we hit the new purchase order and it did its first insert, there were a bunch of PK fields that it handled for us and that we cannot assume are going to get handled the same way. We'll have to very carefully test that functionality of what gets automatically handled on insert. For example, I know that document type here on this is only getting set to order because there is a built-in filter on this page for the document type. As you can see, page filter shows us that. That's hard coded right into the page. That means that anything new automatically gets that. Well, just because the page automatically gets that does not mean that we are going to get that. So we have to handle the doc type, which is a PK. And I also know from my perspective that I didn't pick anything about this document number, so we're going to want to test very carefully that the document number, which is also PK, I know there's complicated code behind how that is handled in the automatic assigning of numbers, so we will have to test in 16, is there anything we have to do besides insert true to get this to populate? So that is a question mark for us. And when I do the drill down here, I'm doing a drill down logic on the vendor name, which, again, it's a usability thing. I think that's probably better for end users, that's the way that works. Because, for example, if we type test, I believe... Okay. I thought this would give us a drop down. Did the drop down for name go away? What a peculiar thing. Okay. Well, anyway, so when we do the lookup on this, it is giving us the list of vendor names. And we say OK, and that is doing some validation using the vendor number, which, despite being smooshed between a couple of primary key fields, is not a primary key value. You'll notice it also validated the pay-to vendor number and a whole bunch of pay-to name fields, and a whole lot of things default from the vendor card during that process. So we know it is critical to validate the buy from vendor number. If you've automated these things before, so apologies, but we need to kind of talk through how do you find this information out. So for example, if we had currency on the vendor card, that would come through here, and if there were any payment terms, that would come through here. What we're looking for now is there anything that right at this moment in time, if we were to try to add the item to this, would it let us, or would it give us an error message? So let's add an item. Now with the page inspector on, when you click on something, it will highlight the part you're looking at and tell you about that part. So we can see we're looking at the purchase order subform, which is coming from the purchase line, which, as we can see from the page filters, is getting the type and document number automatically from the page. So already we know that we also not only have to handle the line number auto split key, but we have to handle the doc type and doc number. And then finally we validate the type, and it at this point hasn't inserted. The record technically does not exist at this point. The reason for this is that in the code of that subform page, it specifically has delayed insert turned on, so that if the user comes down and starts clicking around and tries to come down to the third line and do stuff, but they don't actually enter any data, that third line doesn't get inserted. Because on these, particularly on these ordered type pages, users will click around, they will punch in stuff. So the delayed insert is good to be aware of from a development point of view, especially if you're doing any extensions that hook onto this page. You can get yourself into a world of trouble trying to call modify on a record that hasn't been inserted yet. So, heads up, thankfully, we get to avoid that for this project. So, now, when we select the number, we get an error. And unfortunately for us, with page inspection turned on, we don't actually get to find out what that error was because it's validating funky and all sorts of things. So here we come in and we see that when we try to validate this item, we see that tax posting setup doesn't exist, where the VAT business posting group blank and VAT product posting group blank. Oh, okay, that's probably true. Yeah, I mean, blank blank. Sure. So let's one of the strongly recommended design patterns for building your own extensions from a usability perspective, when you have a situation like that where you are trying to do a get on primary keys, in this case a VAT business posting group and a VAT product posting group, and you don't get a record and it's something related to setup, it's better to then ask the user, this setup is not available, would you like to set it up now? And if you're being extra fancy, you can throw a permission check around that to see if the user in question has permission to the setup table that you're looking at. So you get this nice workflow that if a setup is missing and they have permission, you drop them right to the record that is missing so they can configure it. And if they don't have permission, you can give a more verbose message saying that this permission, that this setup is missing, and unfortunately you don't have permissions to configure it. Please contact someone. So I like that design pattern better. It's used in a couple of places here and there, but not everywhere. And this is an example where it would come in real handy because we could jump right off to the tax posting group setup. In our case, we know that that's the name of the table, so here's hoping that's the name of the page. Tax posting setup. My hope is that I can get away with not really setting anything. Nothing. And it's wanting us to set some tax accounts, which hopefully does not matter. This is my little dummy sales world here, or GL world. Let's use one of the adjustment accounts, because in theory, we shouldn't have any tax-related charges. I'm not setting up any tax groups. It makes sense that it wants us to use this, but we shouldn't need it. However, that goes on our list of things that need to be handled when we're dealing with Automagic. Okay, let's see if that's enough for it to not complain. It might be, might not be. Okay, so far so good. Vendor invoice number is flagged as required, but is it? That is something that you can set in the purchase and payable setup. External document number mandatory. Okay, so we know that in purchase and payable setup, we should probably flag this off. Separate issue in purchase and payable setup, shut off external doc mandatory. There we go. Cool. And voila, the mandatory flag goes away. Beautiful thing. All right, and we're just going to keep this nice and simple. We're going to buy one. Now, I know that I haven't done anything yet with pricing and costing and that sort of thing, so it's okay that here we're saying that we aren't, that we're needing to fill that in. It's a good idea for us to note what things we're having to validate, though. And anything I'm entering or choosing or whatever have you, I'm going to assume that there's some validation code that we're going to need to call. So we're going to assume we need to validate the type, the number, quantity, and cost. And this direct unit cost excluding tax field, that field is not this is the caption, it's not the name of the field behind the scenes, so something to be aware of when you're automagicing documents is those can be significantly different. So let's say this is 20. For the sake of conversation, we'll pretend this is dollars. Why not? So now we can see that the tax amount excluding tax you know what? For giggles, let's bump this quantity up to 10. And that way it becomes a lot more obvious what things are totals versus the actuals. If we now look at the inspect, and we come into the table fields on this, let's see, this will give us a little bit more insight into what's going on. So you can see when we enter 10 into the quantity, it also updated the outstanding quantity, updated the quantity to invoice, quantity to receive. When we enter 20 into the direct unit cost, which you'll note is not named direct unit cost excluding tax, that's a dynamically generated caption. Let's see, I think my inspector lost track of what I was looking at because I was clicking around. Right, there we go. Then it validates into the unit cost LCY because after all, this invoice could be in euros and my local currency could be dollars, could be all sorts of things. And then we get separately this amount, which is the amount of the line, amount including VAT. Right, yep. So lots of things get validated based on the user entering it. Now, my curiosity is, would this post now? If you haven't used it yet, there is the ability to preview post, and hiding under actions posting, you can also do test reports. I often, it's a little buried these days. I like the test reports. I think they give you a lot more detail info if anything is missing. And you can choose, like, are we just going to try to receive it, or are we receiving and invoicing it? So I'm going to say, okay. So right away, the minute we try to even just run the test report, we run into a GL setup is missing something. And that is because it wants to validate what is our local currency code. So we now know another thing we're missing. General posting setup, LCY. No, not general posting setup. It was the general ledger setup. Okie doke. And for sanity's sake, since I'm in the EU, I am going to go ahead and decide that this is euros. And it's going to know what to do with that automatically. Local currency is this, local currency description is that, sure. We can also round things if we want. Do we want to round invoices? I know, like, for example, here in Sweden, the crown is the unit of measure, or the unit of currency. There is decimal portions on that, but they are not used, so the total gets rounded. So in that case, we would have an invoice rounding precision of 1. And we would round to the nearest. We can also do rounding at different stages. Not going to. So, general ledger setup, LCY code. And I called it the wrong thing here, so. Okay, now, test report, preview. Let's see what else we're missing. And since it's the first time I've run this in this database ever, I suspect this might take a second. Okay, and we get this nice little rendered report that would be, this is approximately what we would see if we were to print this out. Wow, that's some interesting zooming. Let's go with that. I'm presuming that because it's PDF, it's just previewing in the browser panel, but to zoom the document, I'm also zooming all the controls, so that's a little bananas. Let's reset the zoom and undo page width. There we go. Okay. That makes a little more sense. So this shows us, here's all sorts of stuff that's validated automatically, and here's all the totals. And the nice thing is that we don't have any error messages. So theoretically, we can post this. Let's find out what happens. see it's getting a posted invoice number. And there's the error I was expecting a little more complaining about. And this makes sense. In this case, we don't have an inventory posting setup because we haven't created locations and the inventory posting setup to go with that. Now, in a business setup environment, you could absolutely run with, if you only have your main location and you're never going to expand ever, then sure, don't create a location code and just create a setup with the location code blank. I don't generally recommend it. I recommend always setting up at least one location code because it's much easier to deal with adding a second location code. If 15 years down the road, for example, your son takes over your business and decides to buy another company and now you have a second warehouse. Okay, well, it's a lot easier if you've already got a location code filled in. So in our environment, we are absolutely going to have locations. That's how the bots are going to manage things. So we know that to test things out, we also have to create, at the main setup level, we have to create locations and inventory posting setup for that location. So locations, and this is going to give us let's just call it basic one, test one. This is giving us a really nice run through of what data are we going to need to worry about. Now, for our basic warehouse, the nice thing is all the defaults for us are going to be pretty much fine. We will end up doing some things with bins as we test the logistics bots parts of the system because we are going to use bins to drive cubage. There is nothing built into the location level that will allow us to set a maximum amount of items that we can store in this location. But on a bin level, like main storage, sure, main, whatever. On the bin level, we can have capacities. I believe that is not on here by default. Here it is, maximum cubage. So what we're going to do as part of the game balance to require players to have to manage their inventory in a smarter way is our locations are absolutely going to, when we hit this point when we're working with the logistics area of the system, we are going to have to create bin templates for the locations that are going to get created, and all of our items are going to need to have cubage. And that way we'll have the ability for for Business Central to reject usage if someone is trying to. Last bin's fine. We will reject things that are going to go over capacity. So that's pretty cool. For our initial swing at this, where we're just trying to create this, that's fine. We're not gonna muck with that right now. We will note that for later. So locations, bins, max cubage, show it, and on items, cubage. So just some notes for our code units a little later on. I didn't import that into the master items, so we are also going to need to think about that from the item perspective. So if you had not seen here on the item itself, just in case you've not worked with this before, under our navigate item units measure, here in here, we decide for this unit measure how much cubage does this take per each in this case. So you can do volumetric calculations on things, and BC does have some support for cubage and I believe weight maximums in a bin. So something to consider if you haven't used it before. Okay, so we've got that location. We need the inventory posting setup, which this is tying together for a given location against a given inventory posting group from the item card. What account does the inventory go against? Which I was sure I had an appropriate account for. Get out of here. Inventory. Yeah, it's this locations one. That's weird. Wonder what, I must have the wrong account category set on that. That's weird. Okay, sure. I haven't worked with the account categories and subcategory functionality very much in the general ledger, so that was a whole new thing for me to learn a little bit about. So we're going to see, as we're testing things out, do we need anything besides the inventory account filled in? Okay, so we know that this needs to be set up, and we need the inventory GL account. Great. Now we should be able to go back to our purchase order, and let's see if this posts all the way through. And we'll also see, did it land in the right spaces? Receive invoice. Great. Inventory posting. Oh, wow. Yeah, that also helps. So when we create the vendor, we might need to think about, are we tying those vendors or customers to locations? And when we create the purchase order, what location are we using? So we're going to have to think a little bit about that from a mechanical perspective. If a player has, 5 warehouses, 2 of them basic, 3 of them advanced, how does this vendor know to use that location? So that's a question. I don't know if I know the answer to that just yet. And I believe that's under our shipping tab here. Nope. Okay. I see. Right. Yep. Okay. It does not set the location on the lines, so we will add that to our list of what do we need to have on a purchase order line. I believe this will default on any new lines you create from that header, but that might be a functionality of the page, so we don't want to assume, so we'll leave that in there as a line-based question mark. Okay, now post. And direct cost applied account in the gen posting setup. Okay, so this one is a little bit easier in that in the gen posting setup, I'm missing a GL account, and that can just be fixed in the master company template at the moment, which I appreciate that it's giving me the error message about that, but then the drill down or action for opening the related record takes me to the purchase document and not the setup. So that's a little bit of a bummer. Okay, so direct cost applied in gen posting setup for tier 1 class 1. Okay. Okay. And it cares about the direct cost applies. Okay. Out of curiosity, I haven't set up a chart of accounts for folks myself in a few versions, so this little suggest account functionality is a little new to me. All right, cool. They did lazy coding. When you're building pages, you can just do rec and then take the action based on rec, but you can also get selection filter to have the so that you can select multiple rows and then apply that button to multiple rows. From a usability perspective, please always do the get rec filter, and if it makes at all sense, the user might just want to pick 10 entries and have the button applied to that. It's generally preferred. Okay, let's see. I expected to be missing a couple of GL accounts here and there, so this is totally within the realm of not surprised. Cool. All right, so this was posted, and we could see the post invoice. I'm going to say no, we don't need to do that right this sec. Our main goal at this point is just to do the same thing on the sales order side and see what are we missing in that workflow. Okay, because it's going to be pretty parallel. They're kind of mirror systems. We're going to have the same doc type, doc number, validate the buy sell to customer number. We will need the location, and then the line will be almost the same sequence of events. Cost. So noting down my costing of things, I probably will want to update my master item import with a new column for the price of an item, base price, to give our value calculations later, but we don't need to worry about that today because I am almost at the end of my time, or a little bit past it. Okay. Alright, so real quick here, we are working in our, if you leave currency code blank, it assumes you mean the LCY that you have set on your general ledger setup. So this is assuming that we are in euros. So that was what messed me up on the purchase order. Here on the sales order side, the ship to, you don't change that because it's not where you're coming from. You change a location code. Over in the purchase order side, the ship to is where are we receiving it, and in the drop down there, then we could choose the location and then choose a location code. So that was a little weird of a workflow. Okay, so now item 1000. So far so good. It's letting us enter the info, and that answered a question. Yes, if we set the location on the document, it defaulted on the line. So that's cool. Let's sell half of our stock. And the price on these, I think on our other one, we were charged 10. We will sell them for 20 for a nice big markup. Yeehaw. Okay. All right. Cool. Actually, I think we bought. Yeah, thought we bought them for 10. Oh well. Anyways, so we can see it defaults a whole bunch of things just as it did before. Let's just jump straight to post and see what happens. Worst case scenario, it gives us an error message. Okay. Now, there's something that I noticed as I'm looking at that dialog. The posting dates on these are currently my calendar date because I haven't added the functionality yet to change the work date to the game date. So that is something to think about, that we need to make sure that when we're creating the purchase order, the posting date and related fields needs to be using the work date. And we need to make sure that that logic is in place to change the work date to the game date. So that's cool. All right. That gave us a nice little test run of how are we doing? What did we miss in our setup? Could we theoretically correctly set up some bots now to generate some basic transactions? So now we can also see here that we've got some transactions in here, that we have some accounts receivable, which raises its own interesting question. We have sales, we have net income. Okay, so that's cool. I'm a little confused as to, we received 200 euros worth of stuff, did we not? So where... Post a purchase invoice. And if you haven't spent much time using the parts of the system from a user perspective, we can look at the documents here, and we can navigate to see all of the related transactions, which I believe, yeah. Personal pet peeve of mine, you have a button called Navigate and a menu called Navigate, and you put the Navigate button under Actions. What? Come on. I tried describing that over the phone to a user. Okay, I need you to go to Navigate. No, not that Navigate, not that Navigate. I mean the Navigate under Actions. What? Come on. Alright, show related entries here. Okay, so we can see here the purchase hit these accounts. Interestingly, they hit for 0. So something in that workflow was not correct. How did we blank the unit cost? Well, that explains why the general ledger is weird. I don't recall having blanked the unit cost, so let's make sure that something odd is not amiss here. I do like being able to search like that. These partial work matches are fantastic. Love that. Good job there. Okay, fantastic. We just need to hurry along because I'm a little bit over on time, and I wanted to see the impact on the GL here. And we have the same issue in that I forgot to set the location here. Yes. Location. And you can see too that in the captions, because I have an LCY code, it's showing that the total is in euros because I've set it to be so. So if we do 10 of these, and let's say these are much more expensive at 25. Great. Post. You better believe, yes, I want to see the posted document. Gimme. Because that was weird. Okay, so somehow or another we must have gotten an error message before that invalidated the direct unit cost amount, and I just errored and didn't correct that. That makes more sense to me than something else going wrong. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. From a quick user thing, if you are getting those little pop-ups that say, do you want to open the posted document, and they're driving you bonkers, my notifications is your guy. You could come in here and say, hey, don't show that. I don't want to see that. Thank you very much. Boop, gone. So this is where a lot of things hook into. It's a good idea to hook your own pop-ups into this for users to be able to disable it, but I will say that functionality is a little complicated to hook into in my experience if you don't know how it works, so a little bit bumpy there. Okay. But the good news is that we create a customer, we create a vendor, and we did see some things. Now, next up in our to-do when we rejoin next time is we're going to be taking a lot of this roadmap and we're going to use this to create functions to do each of these things. And that will be the heart of that'll be the brains of the bots, really. So a little bit of a coding light episode. I don't think we even really looked in Visual Studio Code. But this is the information gathering process that we need to have when someone hits us with the scary word, automatic. I don't like that word. I hate that word. That word means hundreds of hours sometimes. Something I will also look at doing is we currently have accounts receivables and payables. Those are never going to get paid. With the way that we've got things set up, I will probably create a payment method code that will treat these as instant payments rather than anything else. And then if we later play any games with having collections be an aspect of gameplay, we can switch customers globally over to a new payment method code. You can simply just do that, and then we don't have to worry about it. And this 100 would have landed straight in our cache, which I am, again, for simplicity's sake, not using a separate bank account because we don't need to do reconciliation, currency conversions, and that sort of thing. So we're just receiving things directly against cash. Which also makes our liabilities tiny because we're not doing anything with salaries. Okay. So that was the info gathering that we needed to do today to get the basics of what do we need each of these functions to do. So on our next episode, we are going to create some quick bits of functionality in our sales and purchase bots to try these transactions out. Initially, I'm going to hard code those for our test case here in our Test Player 5 company where we've got those locations configured and everything. And between now and then, I will try to think about how do we want to handle customer and vendor location configuration. For example, that might just be something that players get to decide. We might just make it that easy, and that way they could go ahead and say, all 20 customers are currently fulfilled from basic, and then when they finally unlock an advanced location, they can choose to split up the customers between those two separate locations for a faster throughput or something like that. And then we'll manage that through permissions that, on the customer table, they're allowed to update the location code only or something like that. We'll see how that works. I'm not 100% sure about field level permission to that method. We may just manage that with some page extensions to lock editability, depending on the role that they've been assigned in the player table. So we'll see. All right. Well, as I said, this episode was not going to be a whole lot of code. We were going to delve into the how big of a set of assumptions is the Automagic word, and that was that was a fine example of we have a lot to code, but I think that gives us our roadmap for most of the next week, and we will start to see transactions transpiring from some of our purchase and sales bots. And we answered a few key balance questions while we were at it and tested the configurations. So lots accomplished, even if it's not a lot of code yet. So thank you for watching, and enjoy your weekend, everyone.